Welcome to Stairway to English. Today, we bring you the amazing story of Spartacus. Listen, read, and practice English while enjoying history. Don't forget to like and comment if you find this video helpful. Episode 1: The Early Life of Spartacus. Spartacus is one of the most famous names in history. His life story is not only about war and rebellion, but also about courage, hope, and the dream of freedom. For many people, Spartacus became a symbol of fighting against injustice. His name is remembered even today because his story is powerful, emotional, and inspiring. To understand Spartacus, we need to look at the time he lived, the world around him, and the choices he made. In this episode, we will begin the journey by exploring his early life and the conditions that shaped his destiny. Spartacus was born around 111 BC. He came from Thrace, a region that is now part of Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. Thrace was known for its strong warriors. The people of Thrace lived simple but difficult lives surrounded by mountains and rivers. They were often involved in battles and wars, either defending their land or fighting as mercenaries for other countries. From a young age, Spartacus probably learned how to fight, hunt, and survive in hard conditions. This early training would later help him become a great leader. However, life in Thrace was not easy. It was a place where powerful nations like Rome wanted control. The Roman Republic was expanding quickly during this time. Rome wanted new lands, new resources, and new people to control. Thrace was one of those regions that suffered under Rome's growing power. Many Thracians were captured, enslaved, or forced to fight in the Roman army. Spartacus's life would soon be touched by this reality. Some historians believe Spartacus once served in the Roman army as an auxiliary soldier. If this is true, he would have learned Roman military discipline, weapons, and strategies. This knowledge later helped him when he led thousands of slaves in battle. But serving Rome did not mean freedom. Many times, auxiliary soldiers from Thrace were treated with suspicion or disrespect. Spartacus may have felt the pain of being used by an empire that cared nothing for his people. At some point, Spartacus was captured and sold into slavery. The details are not fully clear, but it is believed that he was taken to Capua in Italy. There, he was forced to become a gladiator. Gladiators were slaves trained to fight for the entertainment of Roman citizens. Life as a gladiator was brutal and cruel. Men were trained like animals, kept in harsh conditions, and made to fight until death. The Roman people saw it as sport, but for the gladiators, it was suffering and humiliation. Spartacus was strong, brave, and skilled, so he became a powerful gladiator. But deep inside, he hated this life. He wanted freedom, not glory in the arena. He wanted to live like a man, not like a tool for entertainment. The more he fought, the more he understood the injustice of Rome. The gladiator school in Capua was like a prison, and Spartacus began to dream of escape. It is important to understand the world of Rome at that time. Rome depended heavily on slavery. Slaves worked in farms, mines, households, and gladiator schools. Without slaves, Rome could not grow so fast. But slaves had no rights, no respect, and no freedom. They were treated as property. The system was cruel, but it also created anger and pain among the enslaved people. Spartacus was one of them, but he refused to accept this life forever. His spirit was different. He carried the strength of his Thracian roots, the skills of a warrior, and the intelligence to lead. When he looked around at the other gladiators, he saw not only fighters, but also men who dreamed of liberty. They were all tired of chains, blood, and fear. Slowly, Spartacus began to imagine a rebellion. At first, it was only a thought, but soon it would become a plan that changed history. The story of Spartacus is not only about battles, it is about the human desire for dignity. In his heart, he believed that even a slave had the right to live free. This belief gave him the courage to risk everything. He knew the dangers, but he also knew that life in chains was worse than death. His story would inspire not only the slaves of his time, but also future generations who heard his name. This is where our journey begins, with a man born in Thrace, taken by Rome, and forced to fight as a gladiator. Spartacus's early life was full of pain and challenges, but it also shaped his courage. In the next part of the story, we will see how he turned his dream of freedom into action and how he started one of the greatest slave rebellions in history. Episode 2: The Gladiator Who Refused to Break. After being captured by the Romans, Spartacus was sent to the city of Capua. This city was famous for one thing: its gladiator school. The school was owned by a man named Lentulus Batiatus. But the word school is not the right word. It was not a place of learning or growth. It was more like a prison. Inside its walls, men were trained to fight each other. They fought not for honor or freedom, but for the entertainment of Roman citizens. The life of a gladiator was cruel. These men were often slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war. They had no rights, no choices, and no future. They were forced to live in small, dirty rooms. Food was simple and never enough. They were beaten if they disobeyed orders. Every day, they were trained to fight with swords, shields, and spears. They were taught how to kill quickly, how to survive in the arena, and how to entertain the crowd. To the Romans, they were not human beings. They were just tools of violence, living toys that could be thrown away after the game was over. Spartacus, however, was different. He had been a soldier before he was captured. He understood discipline, courage, and strategy. More importantly, he had something the others often lost: hope. While many gladiators accepted their fate, Spartacus did not. He refused to believe that his life would end in chains. He refused to think of himself as property. Even though he wore shackles, his mind was still free. His spirit could not be broken. Other gladiators noticed this about him. Spartacus was strong and skilled, but his true power was his leadership. He spoke to the men as equals. He listened to their pain. He shared their anger. Slowly, the gladiators began to respect him. They trusted him. In a place where most people thought only of survival, Spartacus dreamed of freedom, and he planted this dream in the hearts of others. At night, when the guards were gone, the gladiators whispered to each other. They spoke about their lives before slavery. They spoke about families they would never see again. They spoke about freedom, which seemed like a dream too far away. But Spartacus did not let the dream die. He believed that even slaves could fight for a better life. Finally, one day, Spartacus and about 70 other gladiators decided to escape. It was dangerous.
even foolish in the eyes of many. They had no weapons, only kitchen knives and sticks from the school. The Romans were strong, organized, and armed. But Spartacus knew that courage and surprise could sometimes win against power. When the moment came, the gladiators attacked their guards. The guards were shocked. They did not expect these men, who were always beaten and controlled, to fight back. The gladiators fought with fury, using whatever they could find as weapons. And they won. Blood covered the sand, but the gladiators were free. After their escape, the men ran into the countryside. They were hungry, tired, but alive. For the first time in years, they could breathe as free men. Soon, they found something that would change everything. A wagon filled with real weapons, swords, shields, and spears. With these tools, they were no longer desperate slaves. They were soldiers. The men chose Spartacus as their leader. And it was not a hard choice. He was strong, intelligent, and brave. He cared about his companions. He wanted not only his own freedom, but freedom for all of them. Under his leadership, the small group started to organize like an army. They trained together, ate together, and planned together. At first, they were only thinking about survival, but as days passed, a bigger idea grew. What if this was not just an escape? What if it was a rebellion? The Roman Republic was powerful, but it was built on the backs of slaves. What if those slaves rose up? What if they demanded their freedom? Spartacus believed it was possible. Soon, news of the escape spread quickly. Romans were shocked and angry. How could slaves defeat trained guards? How could gladiators, who were supposed to die for amusement, turn into warriors? Fear began to spread among the Roman masters. If a few dozen slaves could rise up, what would happen if thousands joined them? The small group of 70 men was the beginning of something far greater. They began to grow in number. Slaves who heard of Spartacus's rebellion ran away from their masters and joined him. Shepherds, farmers, and poor men also came to fight. Each new person carried the same dream: freedom. The mountains of southern Italy became their new home. From there, Spartacus and his followers built a camp. They were no longer gladiators forced to fight in the arena. They were free men fighting for their lives. And under Spartacus, they became an army. The legend of Spartacus had begun. Rome had not yet understood what kind of fire had been lit, but soon the whole republic would feel its heat. The gladiator who refused to break had now become the leader of the greatest slave rebellion in history. Episode 3: The Growing Army of Freedom. The escape of Spartacus and his fellow gladiators was only the beginning. At first, they were just 70 men, hungry and armed with stolen weapons. But freedom is powerful, and the dream of freedom spreads quickly. Soon, news of their escape moved across the countryside. Slaves whispered to each other in the fields, in the kitchens, and in the markets. They whispered about Spartacus, the gladiator who fought back. They whispered about a new hope, a chance to break their chains. Slaves began to run away from their masters. Some were shepherds who worked on lonely hills. Others were farmers who lived under the control of rich landowners. There were also men who had been punished unfairly, poor workers, and even some criminals. All of them wanted the same thing: to live as free human beings. Slowly, the small group of 70 grew into hundreds, and then into thousands. Spartacus welcomed them all. He knew that not everyone was trained to fight like a gladiator. Many of the new men were weak or unskilled with weapons. But he also knew that numbers gave power. With more people, they could fight bigger battles. With more people, they could make Rome afraid. Spartacus did not turn anyone away. Instead, he gave them courage. He told them, "We are no longer slaves. We are an army of free men." The mountains became their home. From there, Spartacus taught his men how to fight as soldiers. He remembered the skills from his days in the Roman army. He taught them how to move together, how to make plans, and how to surprise their enemies. The men learned quickly because their lives depended on it. When the Romans heard of this growing rebellion, they laughed at first. To them, Spartacus and his men were only slaves with stolen weapons. They believed that a small Roman force could easily destroy them. So they sent an army to capture the rebels. But Spartacus was clever. He knew the mountains well, and he used them to his advantage. His men hid in the forests, waited in silence, and then attacked suddenly. The Roman soldiers were shocked. They thought they were fighting weak slaves, but instead they were facing warriors who had the courage of men with nothing to lose. Spartacus's army defeated them. This first victory was very important. It showed the slaves that they could win. It also showed Rome that this was no small problem. Spartacus was not just a runaway slave. He was a leader who could build an army strong enough to defeat Roman soldiers. After this victory, even more people joined Spartacus. His army became so large that some say it grew to 30,000 men, and later even more. Families of slaves also followed, bringing women and children. The camp was no longer just a group of fighters. It was a community of people who believed in freedom. Life in the camp was not easy. Food was always a problem. Thousands of people needed bread, meat, and water. The army had to move often to avoid being trapped by the Romans. But despite the hardships, there was hope. Men who had once been beaten and controlled now held swords in their hands. They were no longer afraid of their masters. They were learning to be free. Spartacus was not only a fighter, he was also a leader who cared for his men. He listened to them, he ate with them, and he shared their dangers. He was not like the Roman generals who stayed safe while their soldiers died. Spartacus fought at the front of the battles. His courage gave others strength. But Spartacus also had a larger dream. He did not want to stay in Italy forever. He knew that Rome was too powerful. If they stayed, the Romans would eventually send bigger armies and destroy them. Spartacus wanted to lead his men north, across the Alps and out of Italy. Beyond the Alps, they could return to their homes, Thrace, Gaul, and other lands. There, they could live in freedom without fear of Roman chains. But not everyone in his army agreed. Many of the men were angry. They had suffered under Roman masters, and they wanted revenge. They wanted to stay in Italy, fight the Romans, and burn their cities. They believed that with such a large army, they could defeat anyone. Spartacus tried to explain that Rome's power was too great, but not everyone listened. This difference of opinion would later bring problems. Still, at this time, the army of Spartacus was strong. They marched across southern Italy, defeating Roman forces again and again. Villages and towns shook with fear when they heard the rebels were near. Some poor people welcomed them as heroes. Others feared them as dangerous enemies. But one thing was clear: Rome could not ignore them anymore. The Senate in Rome grew worried. A slave rebellion of this size was a threat to the entire republic. If slaves across the country rose up, the economy and power of Rome could collapse. The Senate realized that Spartacus was not just a local problem, he was a danger to everything Rome had built. The story of Spartacus was spreading like fire. In every Roman household, people spoke of him. Some called him a criminal, others called him a hero. But everyone knew his name. The gladiator who once fought for the amusement of Romans was now fighting against Rome itself. And as the months passed, the war between Spartacus and Rome was only beginning. The dream of freedom was alive, but so was the anger of the Republic. The battles ahead would test Spartacus, his men, and the power of Rome like never before.
Episode 4: The Dream of Escape. Spartacus was a fighter, but more importantly, he was a dreamer. He dreamed of freedom, not only for himself, but for all the men and women who had suffered under Roman slavery. After many battles and victories, his army had grown stronger and more confident. They were no longer a small group of escaped gladiators hiding in the mountains. They had become a true army, a force that even Rome began to fear. For Spartacus, victory was not the final goal. His dream was to take his people out of Italy. He wanted to lead them across the Alps, the great mountains that separated Italy from the rest of Europe. Beyond the Alps lay the homelands of many of his men. Thracians, Gauls, and Germans longed to return to their villages. They wanted to see their families again and live in peace. Spartacus believed that if they escaped across the mountains, they could finally be free forever. The road to the Alps was long and dangerous, but Spartacus was a skilled leader. His army moved quickly, defeating Roman forces sent to stop them. The slaves fought with courage, and they often surprised the enemy with clever tactics. Spartacus used ambushes, surprise attacks, and knowledge of the land to win battles that seemed impossible. Each victory gave his men more hope. At last, they reached the foothills of the Alps. Freedom was close. The mountains rose high in front of them, covered in snow and forests. On the other side was the life they had dreamed of. But then, something unexpected happened. Many of his men refused to continue. They did not want to leave Italy. Some said they had grown strong and powerful. Why should they run away now when they could stay and take revenge on Rome? Others had found food, land, and wealth from their victories, and they did not want to leave it behind. Some simply wanted more battles, more victories, more glory. They were slaves no longer, but they had forgotten the true goal of freedom. Spartacus tried to persuade them. He stood before his army and spoke of the dream they had shared: to break free, to return home, to live without chains. He reminded them that Rome was powerful and would never stop sending armies. If they stayed in Italy, they might win more battles, but in the end, Rome's strength could crush them. Freedom lay beyond the Alps, not in endless war. But many of his men refused to listen. They had tasted power, and power can be as dangerous as chains. Against his better judgment, Spartacus turned his army back into Italy. Instead of escaping, they began to march south again. It was a decision that would change everything. The Senate in Rome watched carefully. They realized Spartacus had missed his chance to escape. Now Rome had time to prepare. Stronger armies were trained and better generals were chosen. The Senate gave command to Marcus Licinius Crassus,
one of the richest men in Rome. Crassus was determined not to make the mistakes of the others. He knew Spartacus was clever and dangerous, and he planned to defeat him with discipline and force. Meanwhile, Spartacus's army continued to win battles, but the dream was slipping away. He still hoped to lead his people to freedom, but now the path was much harder. Rome was ready, and the chance to cross the Alps was lost. This was the turning point of the rebellion. From this moment, the war was no longer just about escape. It became a fight for survival. Spartacus still carried the dream of freedom in his heart, but he knew the road ahead would be filled with greater danger than ever before. The dream of crossing the Alps was gone, and Spartacus would soon face the greatest challenge of his life. Episode 5: The Last Battle of Spartacus. Spartacus had led his men through many victories. He had given hope to thousands of slaves, and for a time Rome itself had trembled at his name. But after turning away from the Alps, the dream of escape was broken. Now Rome was ready for him. Crassus, the rich and powerful Roman general, prepared a great army to finally destroy Spartacus and his followers. Crassus was not like the other commanders. He was careful, strict, and determined. He ordered his soldiers to build strong defenses so Spartacus could not escape. He made sure his men followed discipline at all times. Crassus even punished his soldiers harshly if they showed weakness. Some said he killed 1 in 10 of his soldiers when they failed, just to remind the others never to disobey. The Romans feared Crassus, but they also respected his power. Spartacus and his men fought bravely against this new enemy. For a time, they still won battles, and they still found ways to surprise the Romans. But the truth was clear. Rome was too strong, and Spartacus's army was growing weaker. Supplies became harder to find. Some of his men began to desert. Others grew tired of fighting and wanted to give up. The dream that had once united them was fading. Yet Spartacus never lost his courage. He stood with his men, fought beside them, and reminded them why they had risen up in the first place. He told them that even if they could not win, they must show the world that slaves were not just property, they were human beings capable of bravery, loyalty, and honor. The final battle came in southern Italy. Crassus had trapped Spartacus and his men. There was no way out. The Romans outnumbered them greatly, and their weapons and armor were stronger. Spartacus knew the end was near, but he also knew he would not die as a slave. He would die as a free man, fighting for the dream of liberty. Before the battle, Spartacus gave a speech to his men. He told them that freedom was not just a place beyond the mountains. Freedom lived inside their hearts. Even if Rome killed them, Rome could never kill their spirit. His words gave strength to his soldiers, and they prepared to fight one last time. The battle was fierce and bloody. Spartacus fought at the front, not hiding behind his men. With sword in hand, he cut through Roman soldiers determined to reach Crassus himself. His courage was so great that even the Romans were shocked. For a moment, it seemed as if Spartacus might break through. But the Romans were too many, and slowly the rebels were surrounded. Spartacus was wounded many times, but he refused to fall. He continued to fight, shouting to his men to stand strong. At last, overwhelmed by the Roman army, Spartacus fell on the battlefield. No one ever found his body, for it was lost among the thousands who died that day. The rebellion was crushed. Crassus captured the survivors and punished them cruelly. Thousands of Spartacus's men were crucified along the roads of Italy as a warning to anyone who might dare to rise against Rome again. It was a dark and terrible ending. But even though Spartacus was defeated, his story did not die. People remembered his courage, his dream of freedom, and his fight against injustice. For centuries, his name has been spoken with respect. He was not just a gladiator, not just a rebel. He became a symbol of resistance, a man who stood up against one of the greatest empires in history. The story of Spartacus teaches us that freedom is worth fighting for even when the chances are small. His rebellion showed the world that even the most powerful empire could be challenged. His dream was not fully achieved, but it inspired many people in the centuries that followed. Even today, Spartacus is remembered as a hero, a fighter for justice, and a voice for those who cannot speak. And so, the life of Spartacus ended in battle, but his legend lived on. His courage was greater than fear, his dream stronger than chains. Rome could kill the man, but Rome could never kill the idea of freedom.